Great. Thank you, Sanya. First, let me welcome you all to the Center for Advanced Studies Southeast Europe seminars with guests. And it is my great pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Deana Jovanović. Deana is assistant professor in the Department of Cultural Anthropology at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. She earned her PhD in social anthropology at the University of Manchester. And I won't list all the posts which she held before joining Utrecht University, but I do want to mention that she was both a postdoctoral research fellow at the CAS in Rijeka and a researcher at the Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory in Belgrade. So this is kind of a double homecoming for Deana to hold this seminar in our series. And I'm very pleased that we could make it happen on the occasion of the publication of her first book, published by Cornell University Press, under the title, as you can see on the screen, Staging the Promises, Everyday Future Making in a Serbian Industrial Town. So before I give the floor to Dan, I just want to mention that her research focuses on how people engage with futures in the context of environmental and infrastructural struggles in industrial towns. It is based on long-term ethnographic research in industrial urban environments in the former Yugoslavia. Deana examines mundane engagements with futures and how they intersect with the production of different kinds of power. She explores how conjunctions between the futures and the state appear through various sites of political, social, and economic contentions, such as heating and electricity infrastructures, urban spaces, labor regimes, unemployment, the promise of mineral extraction, and the pollution of bodies and air. So without further ado, Deana, please, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Ognjen, for your lovely introduction and for the kind words. Can you all hear me? So that's one of the perfect. So it's a true pleasure to be here. Although it's unfortunately online, I'm not the biggest fan of the online gatherings. Maybe it's a consequence of COVID. I don't know. Nevertheless, I think it's a great opportunity also to meet each other like this and to discuss my work. I would like to thank Ognjen, a great friend and a colleague, and thank you for the invitation. Ognjen and I know each other for a long time ago, and apart from being colleagues, we were also colleagues in a beautiful research center called Petnica. And I think, that's something that bonds us as well. And it's really good to see some of the familiar faces as well. I'm looking forward to the discussion. It's really a pleasure to announce my book and to talk about it today. So it's here. As Ognjen said, it was published by Cornell University Press, and it was published, it went out in January. This project has been in the making for 14 years, more or less, which also says how time flies. And I started actually my engagement with this industrial town and exploring these things in 2011. That happened when I started my PhD at the University of Manchester to try to understand the industrial transformations that have received back then very little attention by ethnographers and anthropology in former Yugoslavia. So it seems today that I framed the book around this notion of staging and staging the promises. And this emphasis on the theatrical promises are today more than relevant. And also in terms of the performativity of populism, perhaps Serbia has even predicted the future following Andrew's grand line of argument, how the ethnographies of Eastern Europe in the 90s have predicted the future of the West. While the West was paradoxically seen as some kind of region that needs to catch up and was regarded as backwards. But today we do live in an age of post-truth and a political arena which actually looks more like a reality show. So the phoenix actually becomes, even though it was there, I mean, all the time, the performative aspect was since 2011. Today, it's really globally relevant to discuss staging as such. So in this talk, I've decided to do a couple of things. I've heard I have 40 minutes. Maybe I'll be shorter. I don't know. So I've decided to talk a little bit about contemporary context in that this book fits in, both globally and in Serbia. And of course, because this is a multidisciplinary platform, I won't be getting into the nitty-gritty of anthropology. Of course, if you have any questions about it, I would be happy to answer them. But I've decided in this talk just to present my main arguments, provide you a little bit of sense of the place of ethnography, of the reasoning, of the temporality, which I'm going to talk about as well. And make sure to depict at least the scenography. And Ognjen said, well, will there be any anecdotes? I'm not sure, but if you want me to tell something more about ethnography as well and illustrate some of the characters, I would be happy to do that. So to talk about first of all, the contemporary context in which the book fits in, I have to start with Donald Trump and his inaugural speech. Where he said that the golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish, he said. So with the grand promises, he vowed to end betrayal and return power to the people, restoring their faith, democracy, and freedom. So this is a familiar script, right, of a populist spectacle. Something has been lost, and then something lies in ruins, in this case, the state, or in the case of Serbian industrial town, it was the town, the industry, social prospects as well. And of course, only a savior can bring a revival. So now I need to see whether I can move my slides. Okay, I hope you can see the next slide. Can you? Can you?
Yes.
Okay, so so the next slide is also some kind of just a screenshot from the official account from the president of Serbia. Serbia at the moment is going through extreme political crisis, and the crisis of the authoritarian and populist regime. So in this slide, it's just something that kind of video was again started to circulate widely, and it again mentioned the phoenix. And I thought, oh wow, the phoenix is here as well. I have to. It certainly kind of resonates. And in this video, it says Serbia is like a phoenix from the ashes. After years and decades of decline, Serbia has begun to raise salaries and pensions, but also to build roads, railways, to open schools, to build sports halls, to build hospitals and health centers. So beyond the rhetoric, in the book, I actually ask, what do the performances of promises and these kinds of promises of a revival do to us? Yeah, let's just simplify it. In other words, what do performances do to our notion of the future? And it's certainly in the book, I show how they affect everyone. And I show also that such performances of promises have social, temporal, political, and they also make economic effects. So, spoiler alert, I have two main arguments in the book. One is by spending time with my interlocutors, I found out through their stories and following their everyday lives that in this town that I'm going to talk about a bit later, the distant futures were completely not present in their lives. In other words, as I call these performances hijack distant futures from individuals' horizons. And the second argument is that by also people investing themselves in certain kinds of promises, and also sometimes even becoming themselves performers, the performances actually maintain political power, maintain social inequalities. And it's exactly because hope is invested in them. And of course, who wouldn't like to have better life? We all have hopes that, especially living in periods of crisis or social crisis, political crisis, there is really hope to get better. So the theatrical performances of promises specifically resonate in peripheral areas that struggle to be included in the circulation of global capital. So that's the case with Bor as well. Bor is a town in eastern Serbia, so you can see on a map. It should be circulated with red. It's a town in Serbia that has mining, and it produces gold and copper, apart from other metals, but copper and gold are the most important ones. And it also has smelting parts and some of the also factories that make the end products of copper. And this town has been depopulated and majorly affected by deindustrialization, but also post-socialist and post-Yugoslav transformations. In this town, individual and collective futures were uncertain and quite confined. And exactly for this reason, the promises of revival of this industrial company that was in decline and the revival of the town that was enacted by industrial and political elites reverberated quite strongly among the citizens. So what I show in this book, which is based on a decade of ethnographic research by spending years and years living in this town and also collaborating with individuals living in this town, I actually argue in a book that the performative aspects of these promises that were there were crucial to their triumph. They were crucial for many people to orient their troubled present. So I argue in the book how they help also to reorient troubled present, to rearrange it, and at the same time enable some kind of near and only near and immediate futures possible for the people living in this town. So in the book, I explored the particular moment of the so-called revival of an industrial town, which used to be emblematic of post-socialist crisis. It was extremely, and it's still polluted environment, harshly polluted, and the results that recently came out barely. There's a lack of monitoring of pollution, like a holistic approach to it. But some numbers that are there show that it's extremely concerning. However, if we had real numbers, it would be worse than that. And also, the town has had a devastated economy prior to this called revival, and especially after 2000, when there were a lot of waves of laying off the workers from this company. The company is called RTB, or Rudarsko-topioničarski basen, or a mining and smelting basin. It's a complex, and it dominates the local economy, so to speak. I will give a bit of context later, but it dominates in terms of the prospects in the town, and how the whole town actually relies on the prospects of the company and its success. So in 2011 or 12, propelled by an increasing copper price on the global market, the sudden revival was initiated by Serbian government to enhance the future prospects of this declined company, who was majorly indebted at that point, and whose economy actually maintained the town. I followed the book. The book follows everyday lives of individuals living in this town from 2012 until 2018, which is important to mention. It follows actually last 6 years of this company, which was considered to be a Yugoslav giant, and it was later in 2018 sold to the Chinese company, the 65, if I'm not mistaken, 65% of the company. It follows the period when the company was state managed. And I also, in the first chapter, look at how these performances of industrial success and future prospects also helped, in a way, to make the privatization or the transition to different kind of economic arrangement and geopolitical arrangement, especially thanks to the performances that were carried out prior to selling the company. On my way, so I'll tell you a little bit how it feels, and how I came up to kind of think about all these, the scenography, right, and how I learned about that, you know, there's something going on with notions of fake and not quite real. On my way to visit a friend, I stopped by the House of Culture, Dom Culture, which you can see on a photo, which was freshly painted in khaki color. So it was freshly painted because of the within this kind of narrative of the revival of the town. A metal wire installation that you can see in the shape of a bird was spinning around its axis on the rooftop of the building. A friend of mine told me it represented a phoenix, a legendary bird that has been placed there to symbolize the town's resurrection from ashes. The company, he said, had installed it there, but never obtained the necessary documents for it, because the Dom Culture was an anti-fascist state-protected monument dedicated to the fallen heroes of World War II. The bird, or the phoenix, was shining bright red and 24/7 spinning in its axis. Milorad, which I call, all the names are in the book, changed, a president of the Workers' Union, whom we all knew well, just exited the building, and he lit a cigarette as he joined us in the conversation and said to us, they said that the general manager of this company became so inspired while visiting American town, which had a statue of a phoenix that marked its recovery. On his return to Bor, he decided to make a similar one, and we all laughed. And he said, this giant eagle is his show. And he did not use the word show by accident, because the whole town was considered to be maintaining a plethora of stages, which the performance of a mutual revival of the derelict town and the Down and Heel Company was enacted. So staying in this town for longer enabled me to find out that many of the revived material sites made up a scenery that was widely referred by the individuals as scenography, as coulisses, as the makeup, and so on. And this is what I also try to, what I'm illustrating in the chapters. So many individuals, including my friend and Milorad, considered them to be more of a play act of rebirth of the town. So the phoenix was also rarely called as such. Some would call it the merry-go-round at fair, Chinese wire installation, just referring to its bad quality, or someone would say the large bird. Yeah? My friend called it jokingly the phoenix, referring to the male organ. But the phoenix was in fact a symbol of ambivalence, rather than a straightforward symbol of revival. So instead of being filled with hope and enthusiasm, many residents of this town encountered its promise both with hope that this might produce some tangible outcome in the nearer future, and with this belief at the same time that the revival could be achieved in the long run. So such ambivalent encounters and multi-faced engagements with the staged promises of desired futures and welfare lie at the heart of this book. So in the book, I explore performative acts that serve as promises of the future that citizens actually desired. One of them, as in the first chapter, I explain the industrial revival and the promise of industrial revival, which was sometimes seen as fabrication. Chapter 2 explores the town's urban texture, which was a stage that served the town and the company's official to mimic the revival. And I also look at how people interacted with it and what it represented for them when the mimicking actually became at least something, yeah, which was better than having absolutely nothing. And that's the ambivalence I'm also trying to capture. So the second part of the book pays attention to the requirements for living urban daily lives decently. For example, having a clean air to breathe, which was a promise that the company will bring non-polluted futures by building a new smelting factory. Yeah, to cut the story short, the sulfur dioxide in this town has reduced, but other toxic materials today are increased. So arsenic, cadmium, and other things which cause cancer are still in the air. And in the chapter 4, I also discuss district heating and infrastructural promise of welfare and care, and how the heating served as a stage also to deliver political promises and promises of welfare and care that used to be promised in Yugoslavia. The part on infrastructure also contributes a little bit on the underexplored post-Yugoslav afterlives of urban infrastructures. The third part brings a little bit gendered aspect to engagements with the promises and everyday making of the future. It illustrates two contrasting examples of how certain groups engage with possibilities of making post-industrial futures. So chapter 5 focuses on unemployed women who were laid off from the factory, trying to conceive another kind of future beyond the company. And what marks them is their temporality of waiting, which and kind of the hope that, the objects of hope never arrive. While chapter 6 actually talks about younger individuals, especially men, who were acting a little bit more in an accelerated way to get what they called artificially high salaries. The salaries in this town have reached 3 times more than average, and they were quite desirable. But still, there's this kind of sarcasm and kind of seeing through the promise by saying, yeah, they're artificially only because of the certain kinds of support and so on. So they're not quite real, but they still exist. And I'm looking at some younger generations who are still assessing the promise as the artificial, fake, or insincere, but they still kind of try, for example, to get a job at the company as soon as possible because it will soon be gone, and kind of trying to kind of become performers themselves of the very kind of theatrical performance that they actually disbelieve. I also talk in the book about staging. I use it as a metaphor and a reality felt by my interlocutors to theorize the temporal and political transformations that have happened in global urban industrial peripheries at the aftermath of socialist modernity. So these chapters provide insights into the broader experience of citizenship in the moment where promises of reindustrialization, state protection, social economic revival were projected in the future, but long after the promises of abundant socialist state and welfare have been withdrawn. Also, I use the notion of staging and performing, not just to describe the promises given by various actors and what they did, but to illustrate and examine the effects of those promises in general. And the notion of staging, I closely look at it as a notion of performance and representation and dramaturgy, taking it from Goffman and Victor Turner, that indicated particular social situations and relations are performed. And this is what anthropology has been kind of also classic anthropology looking at for a long time, including performances of rituals and so on. And drawing from insights into performances as elements of political, but also which may take form of simulation, what Ivan Rajković is claiming, bluffing, Sasha Neville, or may entail humor, what Larisa Kurtović is our anthropologist analyzing, irony, cynicism, and parody, which Boyer and Jurčak also analyze. I examine the effects of the engagements with the staged promises. Just before I move on, the context of this town is quite complex, and you can ask me in the questions. But it's important to say, like I said, it was a giant, Yugoslav giant, but at the moment it was so-called on artificial breathing. And the company actually also during socialism built the whole town infrastructurally. So today it's almost impossible to disentangle also the material aspects that symbolically or even physically belong to the company. It used to feed the whole town during socialism, and the complex produced copper, and socialism offered this town to be remembered as prosperous and modern. And various people coming from different towns in Yugoslavia and beyond came to work here. And in Yugoslavia, it employed 25,000 workers across Yugoslavia. Mining, especially, has been an endeavor which played an important role in symbolically and economically maintaining the socialist system. So Yugoslavia, as you might know, but it's good just to mention, it was an exceptional socialist principle which combined limited market with relative freedoms, such as freedom to travel abroad and higher living standards. But I can talk about the context of this town a little bit more in questions as well. I want now to come a little bit and kind of give you a hint of what this scenography looked like for my interlocutors, but also to get to know a little bit of actors and how performances were done, how they were carried out. It's interesting that it was not always clear in the media whether the representations of the town were conducted by the company's PR department or by the municipality or tourist offices or journalists interested in this town. So in the end, it was always the company that was behind such news, more or less, sometimes even pretending that the representations in the news were not their official PR statements. So for example, this is the following abstract of the reportage in the national media, which best captures the ethos of the company's performances. So the abstract that appeared in the news said, like a phoenix, this town was a synonym of ruination, now one of the most beautiful. Previously gray covered with clouds of smoke and synonymous for hopelessness. Today, a town is full of life. It experienced rebirth after a complete fiasco. It has higher average salary than most Serbian towns, rich nightlife, frequent theater visits, skateboard park, which you can see on a photo, a karting route, which most cities in Serbia, exception of Belgrade and Novi Sad, cannot boast of. Welcome to Bor. So according to the company, the renovations of myriad sites in Bor had purpose to build much better social ambience in Bor municipality. Many of the postcards, especially tourist brochures, represented it as, again, being a modern town. Serbian actors, movie directors, singers, and some bands occasionally came to Bor for work, but also to take on the role of performers at various locations in the town. So their visits were publicized in the local and national news. These public figures usually gave statements on how they were amazed or even shocked by the development of the town, which has transformed so much to the point they could not even recognize it, which was sometimes some of my interlocutors that appear in the book mock this thing, because the town has been while the town has been refurbished, it was still possible to recognize it. It wasn't redeveloped as it was actually represented. Because some of the performers even said they got lost in the town. They couldn't find themselves in the town, which was not true in that sense. So some of the individuals that were performers were also members of or sympathizers of the same political party, which actually the company's management represented. So there was an overlap between who runs the company, and the managers belonged to the same political party that was also in power in the government. And these sympathizers also had business deals with many of the institutions. And also, it's good to kind of mention that many cultural institutions in Serbia are also run by the people who are formally or non-formally aligned with the main political party. So the performers of the Promise of Revival were also foreign delegations, representatives of foreign companies, embassies like Canada or the US, so countries where the companies had an economic stake in the business. For example, building of the new smelting factory, which I analyze in third chapter, if I'm not mistaken. That was also conducted by various foreign companies which built the site. So on their visits to certain locations, and they were taken also to industrial ones or revived urban sites like the zoo, they usually made public statements to the journalists in which they gave assurances that the town, the future of the town and the company would be successful. The future could be felt in the present. For these visiting delegations, a particular stage would be set. So, for example, at the time of their visit, the whole town would be turned into temporarily non-polluted town, although it's not possible. But so the smelting plant is positioned in the very city center, and it produced the so-called smoke, which fell on a town basically. So the smoke was full of sulfur dioxide. It could cause immediately headaches, or immediately if you're exposed to it for longer. It had a metal, you would have a metal taste in your mouth, and nausea, for example. When I first arrived, I had a lot of nauseas and headaches from it. At the time of their visit, the whole town would actually not be exposed to that smoke, because it would be ordered to the smelting plant to stop its production, although in general smelting plant works 24/7. So the smelter wasn't famous for its production, but if especially weather, depending on the weather conditions like the wind, it would actually fall onto the town. So because the winds could not be predicted and no one could estimate whether there would be smoke in the streets, the smelter would be ordered to temporarily stop its work until the delegations would visit the town. So in this way, important visitors would get an opportunity to enjoy smoke-free tours through the town and breathe without any difficulty, which was not the case when they were not there. So in the situation in which perform promises of certain possibilities in the town, for example, more jobs, better salaries, more prospects, or the idea just that the future will get better, they were considered by my interlocutors in all the chapters that they were less of a real thing. The performance is carried out by the general manager, which was the company's was then, still state-run, industrial managers, local politicians, infrastructural managers, and particular individuals in power that were actually there to create the reality effects. So the reality effects were also enmeshed with experiences of late socialism, and created a feeling also for some individuals that it was still possible to attain certain improvements in the near future. And I think just because during socialism, it was possible, some of the performers, the performances back then, especially A Better Future, then arrived more than today. So one of these reality effects were also artificially raised salaries, and I will talk a little bit about younger people and how they were reasoning about it and what they did in everyday life. But let me first. This is a photo that I really like and represents also some of these renovated facades that were actually there for a while until the rain started falling, and it seems people started criticizing it as being done very in a substandard way. So in these, at least some reparations were sometimes seen as better as having none. It also kind of depicts this, what I'm gonna also say, the logic of the fake it till you make it. which was constantly among my interlocutors. I've spent time with people in their nearly 30s, just because this promise of the revival and promise of better life was mapped onto younger people who were offered opportunities or given new opportunities to work at the company. And such is the person that I called Pavle, who I've met for a coffee. And he was just finishing his BA degree in management. But what was interesting, how when I asked him about, he really wanted a job at the company back then, just because it offered some means to survive there. And he said to me, "Yeah, this story of Bor is quite interesting. You know, it's like it's changing. It's coming from the company and their marketing. So like it's developing. So in fact, they're trying to change the image." So he said it's changed for him in his eyes for the better. You know, they're trying to induce optimism, he said, like it's going to get better. Optimism for better life. Marketing is a real miracle, he said. You simply start believing some stories. So I've asked, okay, so do you believe in it? Do you think life will get better here? He said, you know how we're looking at it? It was really, really bad. This is absolutely great. So I don't think we will go back to it. So at least I hope it will remain like this. So Pavle also, like other of my interlocutors, involved themselves in performing as if the promises of betterment were happening. So they were almost like becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, the fake it till you make it, that depicts the logic of practices also, what people were doing in everyday life. So what Pavle did, and also many of individuals of his age, they were preoccupied with, you know, how they could also become part of the performance, and also taking certain benefits like salaries while they're still lasting. So they all know it will end, and the promise of the revival actually ended in 2016. When suddenly again the new decline was announced 2 years before the company was sold to the Chinese company, and it was sold as the only, represented as the only solution, just because it was then pronounced that again the decline, some savior needs to come and save it from decline. However, when this was happening, you know, there were a lot of desires to take part of take some material also, to be part of the performers of the performance themselves. In spite of the fact that enactments of promises were seen as advertising tricks, like this wall that you can see also on your screen, sometimes they were seen as simulations or illusions. It was the very performative aspect, I argue in the book, that made them crucial to their accomplishment. Drawing on Yaron Ezrahi's work, I argue that the process of imagining and performing by multiple agencies, which entail also redrawing the boundaries between facts and fictions, reality and theatrically in politics, the reality effects were needed in this town, where the ruinations determined the futures and where the futures were contained. So in this town, it was not possible to build quickly new buildings or quickly become prosperous. So a miracle would be needed to get those results kind of quicker in time. And people were quite aware of it, of the temporal logic of, one life can pass until everything gets better. So this is why staging was needed. It was a more effective way to bring desired futures closer in time for some individuals and not to everyone, because I show in the book that class, age, and ethnicity also were certainly there, and made some individuals more privileged to feel those effects quicker in time than others. So the performance actually enabled the audience to experience the effects or some effects quicker in time. And this is what I'm looking in the book, these kinds of temporalities of actions in which people acted. In the fifth chapter, I show that for women, especially who were not able to find new kinds of futures beyond the company, the temporality of waiting was more prominent than for younger people, especially younger men, who were acting quite quickly to get the positions at the company as soon as possible. And this is what I'm looking at, this kind of facilitated temporality of urgency in this town, because the promises did also facilitate that. Many individuals sought for jobs while good conditions were there, looking to secure jobs through personal connections, families, friends, and so on. So, for example, some of them took a role of a presenter. Some aunt would read some kind of a praise to the beautification of the town on the news, and hence her cousin would get a job at the hotel, which was owned by the company. Or younger generations, for example, getting a job through the kinship ties, which was actually something that has been there for decades. But taking into historical into account the historical layers, I wondered what was new in the setting, and the practice of looking for jobs through connections was not new at all. The company was considered to be some kind of also a family firm that was there to also protect so-called social peace, and this is what my interlocutors, how they interpreted also the heritage of their heritage and the industrial heritage. But what was particularly transformed, I argue, is apart from the social and economic relations, were exactly the temporalities of actions taken by certain individuals. For example, for younger people, getting the job as soon as possible was something quite new in a way that they framed it and how they did it. And I won't be getting into the nitty-gritty of it. Some of my interlocutors also were taking a position of becoming the proof that there is a success of the company, and they remained hopeful that revival would at least last for some time. So to kind of conclude, the stage future promises actually chart the present with demands to act more immediately for some. And the temporality of immediacy reflects not only the populist chronopolitics characterized by prompt mobilization, but it rather reflects also social relations and actions that are temporally experienced in such late industrial, semi-peripheral place of global capitalism. What performances and what I argue performances of the promises brought is how individuals encountered them and assessed some kind of scales of futures, meaning immediate, near, distant, past futures, and what's possible. So they were constantly preoccupied with that. I actually show that the near future actually was people were constantly preoccupied with the near future, which is something that previously Jane Geyer and other anthropologists differently kind of argued within global capitalism and so on, but I won't be getting into the debates. But what's important is that the distant futures were evacuated from the horizon. The engagements with these kind of performances also precluded the possibility in realizing and envisioning what the distant future could hold for them. The performances also foreclosed possibilities of prefigurative politics, including the possibilities of imagining any kind of different future. Although it's impossible, we know from the literature in industrial places, it's difficult to imagine anything else. But what kept many people engaged with the broader project of mistrusted revival was exactly the fact that performances still enabled the individuals to maintain hope. So having a lack of possibility also as a company to make the economic choices of their own terms, Bohr actually needed fake it till you make it to realize some potential and to continue extraction of the resources as well. I also argue in the book that it made it possible to arrange the particular party political configurations because, the revival also resulted in a very favorable electoral outcome, which gave power to the state to enable the company to reconfigure itself and basically make a deal with the Chinese state. It was state-to-state kind of deal, and also reposition it on a geostrategical map. So the performances paved the way to the Chinese state capital to enter the European market for raw metal. So my argument is not that the company actually bought the performances, but the performances certainly were there to kind of reconfigure the local political and economic system that enabled this transformation to happen, and also, well, to make it quite easier, because no one would then, no one had even at that point doubt that this transformation would be bad. Why would it be if we have something that is in revival? So buying the companies 2008, 18 happened, which with this move also China positioned its political and economic influence, but at the same time, the Serbia kind of, the company has changed as well. This book has several contributions, and one of them is that the book actually shifts the scholarly focus from studying the past, especially in the literature and post-socialism, to actually explore the futures and how the futures shape our present. And I joined similar efforts like Dacia Janowska, Rebecca Bryan, David Knight, Mateusz Loskowski, and so on, to understand actually what I add, the performative mechanics that make the futures there. Another one is that it shows also that it focuses on industrial transformation, which has been, as I said at the beginning, not quite studied, and usually kind of topics like conflict, nationalism, and violence, and the ways the nation state appeared in everyday life have been dominant in the studying of this region. So although they did an excellent work, the focus has had a significant impact on, leaving many other fields of transformation underexplored, and such is the industry, which has been one of the biggest important fields of life in Yugoslavia and beyond. And lastly, with this talk, what I've tried to kind of also illustrate is that we do live, which Walter Amherst marked as the age of trickster. So trustworthiness, authenticity of institutions, symbols started to appear as fleeting qualities. The promissory performances were crucial in shifting social and political landscapes. They were part of the populist politics, but they're more than that. And I look them in a much wider, beyond the kind of the just being a populist per se. And these shifting processes were so visible in Bor because the political power was acquired by staging the promises to include those who have been excluded for a while, those who were left behind, and also cast outside the circulation of global capital. And Bor stands for all industrial towns, and beyond that, that where performative promises of betterment serve to acquire political power, capital, to attract capital as well, but also to produce new neoliberal policies which widen social inequalities. So I hope that the ethnography from this post-socialist, post-Yugoslav, late industrial, peripheral town is a vantage point from which to look at, from the semi-periphery of Europe, at the performative ways in general through which contemporary capitalist futures are being remade. And I will give a final mark to come to the present. In November 2024, a roof canopy collapsed in Novi Sad, a town close to Belgrade, one of the biggest cities in Serbia. It's highlighting the fragility of so-called renovated infrastructural stages. And because the roof canopy of this renovated railway station collapsed, it also showed systemic issues of populist corrupt government. The building resulted in poor urban planning, and for some, the stage served exactly for this quick effect, what I'm actually talking in the book, making the quick effect. Open quickly, without permission, badly made, and so on. So the station was rushed and renovated as part of Serbia and Chinese-led upgrade of railway infrastructure heading north of Belgrade. The canopy, which weighed several tons, collapsed to the substandard materials and rushed executions. Of course, there's always a celebratory opening of it and prior warnings about safety risks. Officials ignore them, emphasizing speed, which kind of runs through the book as well, over quality, to showcase the mega infrastructural project. So it not only showed the lack of accountability, but actually how badly renovated stages quickly built for their effect seized physically the futures of 16 individuals that were there that day standing under the canopy, which fell on them and they died. So the collapse actually facilitated the biggest student protest in Serbia since the 1968, induced the collapse of government, asking for change of the system, which not only performs, but actually does the actual work of institution. So Serbia is still under canopy. We're all under canopy. We're became some of the ideas and protest slogans among others. So this brings us actually to the new venues for exploration for researchers. And the question is, if we live in the age of the trickster, then, what are the venues and what are the practices and where are they, where the citizens actually start writing screenplays for themselves, and the screenplays that are not given to them, in which perhaps the politics could move from an anti-signifier of the mere performance, and basically where the fake becomes something more real, and where the distant and long futures are possible to be imagined. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Deana. This was wonderful. I really enjoyed the presentation, and I think it links up really interestingly with some of the previous seminars we've had. For example, the one on ethnographic methods with Jose Diaz, the ones that touched on questions of the ecological crisis of capitalism with Marcus Wissen, or extraction and technological futures with Mario Hilbert, which just preceded this one. So I'm sure there will be maybe questions that link up to those concerns, but also we've been having these conversations on CRES as part of our RECAS fellowship group. We talked a lot about the student movement and protests in Serbia as imagining and maybe staging, as you said, some new local futures. We also talked about the Belt and Road Initiative as this overarching new global future that is kind of spreading around the world, including in Serbia, as you mentioned, both with the ownership of the Bor company, as well as all of these infrastructural projects everywhere. So I think there's a lot of interesting threads we can pull on and start unspooling them. Perhaps maybe I can break the ice and pose one question while people are still thinking about their own questions. One of the things that I really loved about your approach is how you really center materiality as an important aspect that often kind of infuses these staged performances and makes them effective in everyday lives. So things don't necessarily have to be true, real, well done, yet they have real effects. And you do that by focusing not just on the make-believe, on narratives and stories that are being told, but also by looking at really granular details of the facades, as you showed us in one of the pictures, or heating infrastructure or polluted air, as you mentioned as well. So maybe if I can invite you to talk about any one of those examples. One that I'm particularly interested in, due to my interest in infrastructures, was the urban heating network, which you did not mention in this presentation, but it's a wonderful example where you have this really, really spread network. It covers basically the whole town, which works 24/7. Most of the people have to constantly open their windows because it's unbearably hot most of the time in Bor. And yet there are outskirts where people don't get enough heating, and they are constantly suffering in cold and overpaying for the energy they're not really receiving. So you have this ambivalence that you always tease out in your work, where you have this promise of heating, where the company and the state by proxy is promising to care for the citizens, to make them feel comfortable, to feel as modern subjects who have heat piped to their apartments. But at the same time, it's actually a faulty system. It should be reconstructed long term, and then it would work better, and it wouldn't have to work 24/7. So right now it's losing money. The company is in debt. People are in debt to it because they can't afford to pay their bills, etc. And you tease out how this arrangement kind of reproduces power relations in the town, how there's this expectation from the state where you always are expecting, some sort of care. You're not always getting what you expect, but also these various forms of inequality and that produce new subjectivities among the users of this energy. So maybe if you want to expand on that example or any of the examples you mentioned in your presentation, that would be great. Thank you
so much. Thanks, Augie. Well, yeah, one of the things that I really like and what I'm looking at was district heating, because it does really reveals some of the tensions, what you mentioned, and although other infrastructural services are also interesting to look at, heating is sensorial as well. So you actually, of course, if you don't have water or if it's polluted, you see it, right? But this is kind of because also temperatures in this town can get up to -15 or so. Then if the flat is really cold, then it becomes a quite big problem. And what you mentioned is actually, I like looking at the materiality, especially district heating very well shows, is that because of the historical legacy, that actually, during socialism, many of these infrastructures were built, including district heating. And they were built also with a different kind of value as well. So it was more built for social good rather than kind of providing some goods and services that need to be paid as much as you spend them. It's kind of the capitalist logic. So heating as a social good was provided in a way and materially kind of made. So we have one heating plant that delivers heat as much the heating plant wants or needs, or even according to the law. There's a law that regulates it. So it does actually, the district heating reflects also some of these ideas that were during socialism, that the pipes that deliver heat should actually bring warmth equally to each worker that actually that lives in a flat. The idea actually that when the heating, there's an overabundant heating, that it's good, then it's also a caring kind of thing. There's something that it's a legacy also from socialism, including the fact of how the materially these infrastructures were built. They're actually impossible to be now completely reshaped, so that, for example, heating becomes completely a good, which is not actually, it's something in between social good and something that needs to be paid. So basically it cannot be individualized fully, because the pipes just stand like that. It's impossible to kind of cut all the pipes. It's interesting because the heating has been actually, what you said, kind of being repaired in a short term, the very kind of repaired, just because until the other chaos or calamity happens. So indeed, instead of going for some more durable solutions that would fix something that hasn't been fixed for decades. And indeed, also it depends on, kind of the good heating provision depends on geological characteristics. Places and buildings that are in the outskirts and higher in the town need more pressure than those who are more lower, and so on. And instead of going for these durable long-term solutions, also how the political kind of system has been maintained is that only short-term and short-sighted reparations produce quick effect. Yeah, and the quick effect is necessary for not just but for electoral outcomes. Yeah, to know, oh, they fixed it well, so we'll vote for them or something like that. But also for the terms of also fluctuation of money. Yeah, there are fundings that some people are, so that as well how enables that. And it's interesting also in this particular town how the expectations of it were formed, but at the same time, what fuels the very heating in this town, and it fuels what fuels it, and what brings the very coal, that a power plant actually uses, is actually, you can see also how it's really dependent on the company, from various things. It's either where the coal would be taken, how, under which price, and so on. And also everything depends on the company, and that is something that actually depends logistically, depends on the one person that is in power, and that has been going on for half a century, right? In more than half a century. So the historical layers through which also social relations formed are today there still. And then it's interesting to look at all these new transformations, including capitalist transformations, and what happens. And even today, although I don't deal with it in the book, it's interesting now to look at, after the company, which is so pervades everyday life. For example, the lake is part of the company. Yeah? It's there because the mine needs water. Yeah, there's a hotel owned by the company. So all these complexes, including pipes, you never know, like whose pipe is whose. Yeah, is it the company's and so on. So the responsibilities and ownership is so blurry that today it's interesting to see, after the change of ownership, what's going to happen with all these material things. And it's not only about a pipe, it's about what kinds of social consequences it brings. So to cut the story short, I think it's really interesting how the heating became, and this is what I'm looking at the book, a particular stage of performing a flawless, abundant governance, town governance, where actually things were overheated. Yeah, and then it goes completely against all the environmental discourses we have now about sustainable energy, because when you're extremely warm, just open the window. Yeah. But it overheats not because it's overheated, not because the system is like, you can only maintain it by overheating. And you can only deliver heat like that to the upper parts in the hills. So completely something, non-sustainable solutions are there to maintain what it's important for the regulation of everyday life, but at the same time of political power. And certainly, then I also look at my interlocutors, how they interpreted, whether the general manager of the company brought the heating or who did, and what kind of. So that's quite interesting to look at how these the warmth is being interpreted by and responsibilities for it are being allocated to different actors in the town. I like that I could talk about heating for a long time, but it's quite. I think it's quite revealing in many ways.
Indeed.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank
and
you.
we can stop there with the heating and see if there are questions in the audience.
Hopefully.
I thank you so much, Deana. I just wanted to remind everybody, or just tell to all of us, that Deana worked on Energo in Rijeka as well. So that was an I don't know what you made of it, but it's an issue. The very subject of even now still non-resolved.
Yeah, in 2016, there were still contestations about it, and yeah, I have an article on it, and I actually compare Bor and Rijeka as some kind of, a place where of a modernist socialist urban architecture. It's built in a similar way, in a sense, and yet it produces similar effects. And I was following how people in Rijeka, with whom I spent time with, were actually trying to get formulas, to better formulas for the individual consumption and how it should be charged. Because that little thingy that measures the consumption actually did not reflect the actual consumption. And then again, there's also this story, what I've mentioned, the pipes not being very flexible in that sense. And I was looking at, by living in a building block in Rijeka, I also experienced heating myself, district heating, and I also did that in Bor. So I have a comparative article. Thanks for reminding me. That I've made thanks to the fellowship. So I had 6 months to collect new data and rethink about entitlements, what people felt justice is, and also I was looking at their relationship with the state. And it's interesting actually how the cases are quite different, but there are something that unites all these on all these sides. And it's, yeah, because the context is somehow also similar. But yeah, thanks for reminding me. Yeah.
But thank you. But and now, if I have some time to, what I appreciate very much, and we know each other for a bit. It's your methodology. It's kind of a micro methodology. It's under the loop. You do have this extraordinary focus. Very nice and beautiful focus. It is ethnographic, but it's also your signature. How to get into under the skin, this was also in Rijeka while you were here. Like you were fully here and now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this, I think this is part of your signature, your methodology.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much for that. Yeah. Well, although 6 months is relatively okay in terms of it can produce a lot of insights. But I think the ethnography is always better when, it's a slow process of gaining trust also from the people with whom you spend time with, as in any relationship. So definitely here and now, but at the same time really matters, and I hope longer in Rijeka, and yeah, maybe in the future, who knows.
Great. Emina, do you want to pose a question?
Yeah, thanks so much, Deana, for this talk. And it's really insightful. And I really appreciate your intersectional critique, which should become part of our different scholarships, I think. I don't have a question in relation to the content you were sharing. I'm still processing quite a lot of things that you shared. But I do have a question about the academic freedoms, and how freely are you doing this work? In the position where you are currently at and in the territories you visit to do ethnography. I'm just curious, what kinds of pressures are you encountering? And especially if those are coming from these, large centers of capital,
Yeah.
etc.
Thanks for the question. It's really it's a great question. It's indeed the academic freedom is, as we know, in globally a problem, unfortunately. And I do think that when it comes to the fighting for freedom, I think we should also be more vocal than it is. I think violence at the moment is much stronger than we are, unfortunately. So I would always be for kind of becoming even more vocal about it. Although there are many academics who do that, and we should all be engaged. This is what I'm saying. It's a certainly an issue, especially when it comes to writing ethnography and about every details that I get from everyday lives, the insights that I have. And I had many problems with myself first, because as any ethnography, I wasn't sure which part would be very sensitive. So if I expose more details about one or two interlocutors, would they face some kind of consequence? And sometimes for that reason, my ethnography, according also to me, seems a bit, I'm not trying to say shallow, but it's not shallow. It's a nice deep ethnography, but I do leave out some details because I am not sure if my interlocutors would be, if anyone reads the book and kind of, I wouldn't like that. So in a sense, I do omit certain details, and I was in a book trying to be as cautious as possible, trying to protect their privacy. But of course, you cannot do it fully, because it's a smaller town, middle-sized town in Serbia, and at the same time, the relationships, how power works in the town, it's quite. You can have certain kinds of risks. Let's put it like that. If you can easily be left without job or something like that, and I wouldn't like that for my interlocutors, at least to happen because of me. So that's one part of the freedom. Yeah. The other one is also the matter of the general kind of how freely I'm doing in terms of the analysis and calling things in what they are by their name, including the names, for example, the public officials that appear. And I think as an academic, I think we shouldn't self-censor ourselves. I think it's important to, as part of our, at least I see myself as someone who have certain kind of responsibility. And I had experiences where my paper on pollution, especially pollution, which is absolutely concerning, has been asked by a project in Serbia. It's called Biennale. That's like the biannual architectural exhibition. And I was part of the state, kind of the team, right, where I was promised actually that I would have academic freedom. And that was my condition, actually, to name things how they are, how they appear, including the names, including the performance, and so on. So I was actually talking about the promise of the new smelting factory and so on in the article. And basically, I was self-censored by the editor of the booklet that follows the exhibition. The exhibition was about Bor, and that was basically part of the political kind of system. Yeah. So I've decided to pull out my work from there. So the answer is, publishing in Serbia like this, I think it's very hard, especially within the kind of these venues, and then they were officially funded by the state and so on. And I think when it comes to that, I think the only thing what I can say that I use my privilege, which is I work at Utrecht University, And I see there, of course, which brings complete, like, power. I'm aware of the power relations it brings, but at the same time, this privilege allows me to actually be more free. And this is what I'm trying to do with the book as well, and I hopefully it will get translated soon, to use that to also on behalf of the people, on behalf of the people that I write about. This position allows me to be less or not at all self-censored. So this is how I'm looking at it. To cut the story short, there's a lot of fear in Serbia, especially in smaller towns, in small-sized towns, where everyone knows everyone. And I think fear is a symptom. So it's really difficult to, as an ethnographer, to gain the trust and work, and then finally, publish something which will benefit both science, but also the people with whom you work with. I think we do have a responsibility, though. So I hopefully. It's always an issue that I'm thinking with. Do you have any, Emina, do you have any sub questions that I haven't answered yet?
This was great. I could talk to you about this forever, but I'm aware of time, and there is another question in the chat box, but I will connect with you because I think a lot of things you said were very relational.
Oh, let's do that. I look forward to talking to you about this. I think it's important. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
And thank you, Emina. And yes, there is a question in the chat. Safet apologizes for not being able to ask the question himself, so I will read it. A brilliant lecture and a wonderful way of connecting the narrative, industrial polluters, foreign investors, pollution protests, etc. I'm interested in the case of the Bor mine. What was the position of the citizens? Were they in favor of the mine or were they against it? Did they initiate a public debate or was it a matter of jobs versus a clean environment? And was there a public discussion considering the involvement of Chinese, Russian, and American investors, etc.? It seems to be the same story all across the Balkans.
Yeah, thanks. Well, that hits the essence of the book as well. I haven't had time to focus on it, but I will now. It allows me to tell a little bit about the work. I think the question if, citizens are in favor or against the mine, I'll tell you that I haven't met anyone who is against mining as such. So let me in this town. It's something that well, there could be, of course. I haven't, so I'm speaking from my own experience. Of course there must be someone, but in general I think there's this also idea of just because of these kind of historical heritage, right? And because this mine has built a town, because of it, everything emerged. Yeah, their parents, for example, my interlocutors' parents arrived there because of that mine. So even the ontological existence was seen because there is this mine. And I think this is not just in this town. I think this is the characteristic of the mining places as such. And of course, in my book, I also have interlocutors who actually do not place value on clean environment at all. And this is what I'm also, as an ethnographic data, trying to understand, that these values might differ from what we would like. But it's easy for me in Utrecht to breathe fresh air. But I'm also trying to understand, what it's like and why these people that I spend time with also kind of familiarize with the smoke, call it, have names. It's very familiar. It's our smoke. It's our town. It's our mine. Yeah. So in that sense, that also makes the how people also see the environmental values. Yeah. And what to do. This is the question now. And what to do. There's always this double bind: jobs versus and profit versus clean environment. But in this particular setting, I've also write about people who actually are ready to be victimized for the sake of, and to victimize the environment or their own health or anything because of the jobs or because of, you know, the life that it should be. The life should be there. So, so in that sense, it brings completely another outlook to what environmental values are. For example, in this town, there are barely any organizations that are against pollution in a way that we would like it to see it, just because it kind of targets all these other things that, you know, individuals wouldn't like to be against. So in that sense, I think it's interesting to look at different discourses, and different values that people put on. Do you have any sub question about it, or?
Okay, I can read the comment.
Yeah, please.
So Safa says, it's the same everywhere. Here we're talking about the commons because minerals are a common good. And that's exactly what's so brilliant about your work. Even when citizens support the mine, you open their eyes and explain.
Yeah. Thanks. Good comment.
Are there any other questions from the audience?
It is just that so with your work, Ognjen, then with Safet's work, with Amina's work, with Deana's work, do think, please, I'm here now on Sres, and Ogi knows, Deana, it was not in place when you were here, but this is wonderful place where we can think about together, and then have a workshop also with the local community. This is one of the main things here, with the local people.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, maybe I can pose one more that I saved to see in case we have enough time, because I didn't want to monopolize the discussion. But one thing I'm very interested in throughout the book, you talk about these memories of socialism, and there has been a lot of analysis of nostalgia, and you don't necessarily approach it as nostalgia, but you think about these futures that were imagined in socialism. So some futures past, in a way, futures that were developed and imagined and worked towards in socialist Yugoslavia, when maybe Yugoslavia was more central to some global flows, certain flows, not others, etc. And now, as you said, there's more of an interest in short-term futures, or thinking about the future is kind of captured through these performances and constrained to think about only the short term. So maybe if you can expand on the role of these memories of socialist Yugoslavia and the futures that were possible under that different kind of system, and the futures that you were encountering during your stay in Bo.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really relevant question. Also allows me a little bit to elaborate on some things. As I said, this town has been emblematic also of some kind of socialist heritage, in a sense. You know, give copper to the people, and it was copper actually was something that was what was regarded by interlocutors also sent away to build also the state. Yeah, so the workers were building the state through their labor and so on. With the people that I'm writing about in the book, perhaps it really depends on individuals. There's a lot of some of them do have a lot of respect to what the heritage is and the values during socialism. But I've realized that there's no such nostalgia as we would expect it to be in some kind of in this kind of a town, working town, yeah, the town that where the state was almost produced. I've realized that there's also a little bit of preoccupation of how things will go on rather than what it was. Including, for example, it's interesting the very kind of the workers, and the workers' status, the conditions in which people are working, and so on, are not in the focus that much, right? And there are some unions, there is some, but the awareness, of the working class, as we would expect it to be there, I haven't found it, at least among the people with whom I spend time with. Of course, there are differences, nuances, and so on, but I'm saying it's not like an ethos in this town. However, it's your question is good because I argue in a book because of the history and because of some kind of past future during socialism and what was possible before. Thanks to that, today the performances actually have succeeded. Yeah, today they have more success, because before, for people, they remember the time when it was possible, first of all, to imagine the future. That's definitely certain. It was possible. This town was modern. They remember the new buildings being built and promises being actually accomplished. Like, almost all the building blocks, not all, but I'm saying, I don't know, half of the town or something. Promise of housing, although perhaps not enough, has been delivered to a certain extent. The promise of heating, the promise of jobs that were available back then, although there was an incredible amount of pollution back then, but that wasn't actually the part of the environmental concern that we have now. But what I'm trying to say is that they do imagine and they remember how at least there was a decent life, and some of my interlocutors really did. For example, so flats they live in now, they got it through the companies, through their own work, or the status of the worker, which was much better than it's today. So those kinds of things. So this idea that it was possible to, this idea that some kind of future was possible, including having modern town with the modern things, and also parks, and having regulated working time from 8 to 5, 8 to 3, and so on. All these things allow today to imagine things again, because all these things are actually reviving the socialist heritage that is there. I mean, the photo that I've showed, it's a shopping mall. It's the wall of the shopping mall where the red color is crumbling now. That building was made during socialism back then. So reviving the building itself just to be more pretty, it actually revives the some kind of material heritage of socialism, and hence it's possible to imagine again that there might be hope again. And I think today socialism and socialist material heritage certainly is important and plays a role in how we imagine capitalism and what kind of hope we ascribe to capitalism. And this is also something really interesting to look at. So yeah, I could, but my interlocutors are also sometimes critical towards it, sometimes not, and there's always nuances. But the ability to imagine future actually draws from the past. It's kind of like it was possible back then. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm mindful of the time,
Sure.
so I would like to thank everyone for coming to this event. And Sanya or Tina, do you want to have the last word to close us off?
Just thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, and it was lovely to see you all. Sanya, good to see you. And Ogi, thank you so much. Also, thank you for reading the book. Well done. Yeah, I look forward also to seeing you all in person at some point. And Ogi, thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it. It's good to be back, so to speak. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.